You see, there's no artist, let me be clear, there's no artist in this industry that's doing major numbers with these platforms that haven't sold their soul.
Today in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
The courtroom was electric with tension, buzzing with the kind of energy that only arises when the stakes are monumental. All eyes were on Jay-Z as he stepped forward to take the stand, his polished demeanor betraying none of the storm brewing beneath. The surface the media had dubbed this trial the entertainment world's reckoning, and that wasn't hyperbole. Two titans of the music industry, Sean Diddy Combs and Jay-Z, were now under a microscope facing allegations that threatened to dismantle their carefully constructed legacies. The air felt thick with anticipation, the gallery packed with spectators leaning forward as if they could physically pull the truth from the proceedings. The room was eerily quiet, save for the occasional clicking of a pen or the distant hum of a camera outside. The moment Jay-Z raised his right hand to swear his oath, it was clear history was being written.
You can be in love with someone, you can love someone and if you haven't experienced love and you don't understand it and you don't have the tools to move forward, then you're gonna have complications.
Jay-Z, a man who had built an empire on confidence and charisma, appeared calm, composed, even regal. But those who knew how to read between the lines could see the tension in his jaw, the subtle clenching of his fist as he rested it on the stand. The judge's voice boomed through the courtroom, commanding silence as the proceedings began. And then it happened, the moment that had everyone on edge: the lie detector test, a controversial tool. Sure, but in this case, a symbolic centerpiece in the quest for truth. This wasn't just about legality, it was about perception. The lie detector was supposed to cut through the layers of wealth, fame, and carefully curated PR to reveal the raw, unvarnished reality.
Jay-Z new video with Nas and DJ Khaled is a scene with checkerboards. These are all occult, Satanist, symbolic symbols.
As the results were read, the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Jay-Z had passed technically, but there was something about his responses, the way they were delivered, that sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. Legal experts whispered. Among themselves, jurors exchanged glances. It wasn't just about the machine's verdict. It was about the inconsistencies in his story that were beginning to surface. The prosecution, sharp and unrelenting, pounced. They zeroed in on every hesitation, every carefully chosen word, painting a picture of a man who wasn't as unshakable as he seemed. The machine may not have caught him outright, but it had done something far more dangerous. It had planted seeds of doubt, and then came the pivot that no one saw coming. The prosecution shifted their focus, weaving a narrative that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. They started connecting Jay-Z to Diddy's infamous gatherings events that had long been whispered about in the darkest corners of the industry. These weren't just after-parties or networking events. The prosecution implied they were meticulously orchestrated operations shrouded in secrecy and rife with exploitation. The term freak-offs was uttered in court, sending a wave of murmurs through the gallery. The victims' testimonies, harrowing and emotional, painted a damning picture. These weren't isolated incidents. The prosecution argued they were part of a larger, calculated scheme, a web of manipulation and control.
Centerpiece of a lot of what happened during direct testimony were freak-offs. And what the prosecution tried to show was that he forced and or coerced her into doing these freak-offs. And we've talked about this earlier this week, that at least my opinion is that in a lot of these, the prosecution just didn't close the loop. It was something she felt.
Jay-Z's calm facade began to crack ever so slightly as the questions grew more pointed. His connection to Diddy was undeniable. Decades of collaboration, shared business ventures, and public appearances. But now those ties were being weaponized against him. The prosecution was relentless, crafting a narrative where Jay-Z wasn't just an innocent bystander in Diddy's alleged empire of abuse, but a complicit figure. They highlighted his shifting answers under oath, using them to suggest that he was deflecting, protecting not just himself, but a larger network of powerful players in the industry. The courtroom was transfixed. Every word, every gesture dissected in real time. It wasn't just the judge and jury scrutinizing Jay-Z, it was a global audience glued to their screens waiting for the next revelation. The lie detector had become more than a test. It was a metaphor for the unraveling of a carefully guarded image. And as the prosecution continued to tighten the noose, it became evident that this trial was about more than just two men. It was about power privilege and the lengths to which some would go to protect their empires. By the time the session adjourned for the day, the energy in the room was palpable. Jay-Z's attempt to protect himself had inadvertently placed an even harsher spotlight on Diddy. The cracks in their stories were becoming too glaring to ignore, and the courtroom's collective gaze was turning into an unrelenting spotlight, but had started as a legal battle was quickly morphing into a full-blown reckoning, not just for these two men, but for an entire industry that had operated in the shadows for far too long. The question on everyone's mind as they filed out of the courtroom was the same. Was this just the beginning of the end for Jay-Z and Diddy? Or was it the beginning of something much larger, a collapse of an empire built on secrets and lies?
Let's talk about the filth that's starting to come out in the early days of the Diddy trial. This, of course, is P. Diddy. Surprise, surprise, he's a creep. Surprise, surprise, he's done horrible things.
As the courtroom drama unfolded, the story began to spiral far beyond the walls of that courthouse, pulling back the curtain on decades of whispers and rumors. What started as a legal showdown between Diddy and Jay-Z was now exposing a labyrinth of allegations, conspiracy theories, and connections that seemed too dark, too calculated to ignore. This wasn't just about two moguls fighting for their reputations anymore. This was about an industry where power and control seemed to operate unchecked. Shrouded in secrecy and bolstered by a culture of silence, the whispers had always been there, of course. Jay-Z and Diddy, two men who had risen from humble beginnings to become untouchable icons of music and business, had long been the subjects of speculation. But now, those whispers were turning into deafening roars. Social media was ablaze with theories connecting dots that at first glance seemed like coincidences, but now felt chillingly intentional. How could we ignore the eerie pattern? Linking the demises of Aaliyah, Lisa Left, and Michael Jackson, all three artists celebrated and beloved had passed on the 25th of different months. And then there was Jay. Cole's haunting track She Knows resurfacing like a ghost from the past with lyrics that seemed to hint at secrets buried deep within the industry.
Hold it down with the lovely Aaliyah. What's going on, Aaliyah?
What's up? How you doing? I'm good. Been a while, sure has.
Online Slew had taken these theories to another level, dissecting every word, every image, every connection. The name She Knows itself became a topic of heated debate. Was it a subtle nod to Beyoncé and Jay-Z's Shauna Knowles, or was it pointing towards something even more sinister, implicating Diddy as a shadowy puppeteer behind the scenes? Skeptics dismissed these claims as baseless speculation, but the sheer volume of coincidences was enough to make anyone pause the public's fascination with. These theories wasn't just about entertainment, it was about a deep mistrust of the elite. Why, people asked, did so many celebrities seem to fall over themselves to praise Beyoncé and Jay-Z at award shows, often during their own career-defining moments? It was almost as if they were paying tribute to something or someone. And then there were the darker allegations. Jaguar Wright, the outspoken singer who had never shied away from calling out the industry's biggest players, added fuel to the fire with her explosive claims. Wright had called Jay-Z and Beyoncé a nasty little couple, alleging that their rise to power was littered with questionable practices. Her words, though unsubstantiated, resonated with a public already primed to believe the worst.
My initial reaction, because that's how I always feel when I see situations like this. And then there's this weird sense of grief, because it is Diddy, right? Diddy is a hip-hop hero. He's an ordinary person who did extraordinary things. To sit here and act like the man wasn't a huge part of our upbringing is a damn lie. So there's this weird sense of grief, like another one of our heroes has ruined their legacy and it's their own fault because of poor choices.
But the theories didn't stop with Jay-Z and Beyoncé. The focus inevitably turned back to Diddy, whose legal battles were dragging his entire empire into the spotlight. The infamous freak OBS described in court were no longer whispers in the dark. They were becoming the centerpiece of the case against him. Cassie Venture's testimony had left the courtroom shaken, her vivid recounting of those events painting a picture of excess and exploitation. According to her, these weren't mere parties. They were meticulously planned spectacles designed to trap and control the mention of surveillance footage from a Los Angeles hotel showing Diddy physically assaulting. Cassie was a turning point, leaving jurors visibly shaken. It wasn't just the allegations themselves that were damning. It was the way they fit into a broader narrative of manipulation and abuse.
So Diddy, after the Cassie lawsuit, gets hit with a bunch of lawsuits, and then ultimately the raids, and then this criminal case.
The prosecution didn't stop at Cassie's testimony. They brought forward additional statements from other victims, each one adding another layer of horror to the allegations against Diddy. One woman identified only as victim. 3 recounted how she was allegedly invited to what was described as an industry networking event, only to find herself in a high-end hotel suite surrounded by strangers, and forcibly coerced into participating in the freak-offs. Her voice trembled as she described the humiliation, the sense of helplessness as she realized the event was far from what she had been promised. "I thought I was there to meet people to further my career," she said, her words echoing through the courtroom. "But it was a trap I wasn't allowed to leave, and I was too scared to fight back." Another chilling account came from a former member of Diddy's entourage, who testified anonymously under the alias Witness Zero. According to their testimony, these events were not spontaneous or chaotic, but deliberately orchestrated with an almost militaristic level of planning. The guest lists were curated, the venues booked well in advance, and the security staff instructed to ensure no one left without Diddy's permission. Witness Zero revealed that Diddy's associates were tasked with scouting for potential participants, often targeting young women who were new to the industry and desperate to make connections.
Because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
And yet the most shocking part of all was how these revelations seemed to implicate others. The prosecution painted a picture of a network, a carefully curated circle of power, where loyalty and silence were rewarded and dissent crushed. Jay-Z's name kept surfacing, not as an outright participant in the alleged crimes, but as someone whose proximity to Diddy raised troubling questions. Were these two men bound together by more than just business and friendship? Was Jay-Z's calm demeanor in court a mask for a deeper fear that his own secrets might soon come spilling out?